Welcome to episode 2 of the Motorcar Marketing Podcast. I'm Ashley Myers at motorcarmarketing.com. In this episode's main segment, I'm going to be interviewing Troy Harrison. Troy has years of experience in sales and sales management. He offers a wealth of great tips for car salesmen and their managers, so stay tuned for that. If you find this episode valuable, please help us out by giving us a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast or liking it on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread the word about the podcast, so thank you for that. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to send us an email at info@motorcarmarketing.com. We want to improve this podcast, so some honest, constructive feedback is very much appreciated. Please also share these podcast episodes with anyone who you think could get some value out of them. A couple of quick notes. Any websites or links that I mentioned in the podcast can be found on the blog and the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.motorcarmarketing.com/podcasts. Also, if you'd like to get our free video selling more cars on Craigslist, just go to www.motorcarmarketing.com and put in your name and email address into the form in the sidebar. This guide goes through all the recent Craigslist changes and shows you some actual statistics from dealerships who post heavily on Craigslist, both now and late last year before the big changes were rolled out. So if you're wondering if you should still be posting your cars on Craigslist or wondering how to get more value out of Craigslist ads, definitely check out this free video. So now let's get into the main segment. Today I'm interviewing Troy Harrison. Here is the interview. Welcome, Troy, to the Motorcar Marketing Podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here, Ashley.
So to start out, I wonder if you can just give us a quick overview of your career in sales and kind of how you got to where you are today.
Sure. I'll tell you what, looking back, sometimes I'm not 100% sure how I got here today. I have been around, my early sales experiences were around the car business. My dad, my grandfather, they've been involved with the car business ever since I was a kid. And my first professional selling job was at the Ford dealership in Topeka, Kansas. I worked there as a salesperson, also sold Dodges and Oldsmobiles for a while. Was in the car business for a few years, and then, quite frankly, I decided that I wanted to do something different. And so I moved into a more business-to-business sales role, worked in industrial supplies and industrial plastics, became a sales manager, worked for a few different companies as a sales manager, won quite a few awards, both as a salesperson and as a sales manager. In 2004, I should say, I actually took a look around at what was being said about professional selling, and I really felt like there were some things that needed to be said about professional selling, things that I had learned from my customers that weren't being said. I could see that sales was starting to undergo a sea change in the way that customers and salespeople interacted with each other, and there were a lot of new burdens on the ways that salespeople needed to interact with their customers. And so I hung out my own shingle and started my own company as a sales training and consulting firm, which is now called Troy Harrison and Associates, located here in Kansas City. But I work nationwide. I've got clients from coast to coast. But for the last 10 years, I've been on my own. I published a book in 2008 called Sell Like You Mean It, which ultimately was nominated for an Axiom Business Book of the Year award and has sold nearly 5,000 copies nationwide. So it's a fun ride.
Mm-hmm. So when you talk about these in 2004, you saw sort of things changing. You're talking specifically about technology and how salesmen interact with their customers through email and different technologies that were coming up, correct?
Partially. Technology is a piece of it. You see, here's how I see the sales profession in terms of the thought development and the thought leadership. It seems like for about the last 50 years, sales trainers and authors have just been piling insincere tactics on top of insincere tactics. And what really happens is we salespeople have trained our customers to spot those tactics, to be suspicious of us, and quite frankly, customers are able to spot so quickly when salespeople are putting them in their trick bag, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And that's given the rise of a much more educated and informed customer. The Internet's a big part of that. Technology, email, message boards, and all those pieces are a big part of that. And as a result, the way that the salesperson has to dialogue with the customer to be effective nowadays is really a lot different than it was even 10 or 15 years ago. And I see that, I see the demand for that nowhere more than in the car business.
Mm-hmm.
Because quite frankly, too many salespeople are still out there selling like it's 1955.
Uh-huh. So, okay, well, let's dive into the actual sales process and
Sure.
maybe just start at the beginning. Let's talk a minute about what I would sort of say are very lukewarm leads, basically leads that come in through email or online. Maybe you can give some tips to the salespeople and the people that are receiving these sorts of, more lukewarm leads. How should they be handled, and kind of what's some good strategies for dealing with these types of leads?
Number one, and my God, I see this so much, but number one, when you get a lead, read the entire lead and pay attention to what is being said in that lead. I had an episode, and I actually wrote about this for one of the magazines, Dealer Marketing. I personally had an episode where I was looking for a very specific automobile, and I filled out an online lead form with a local dealership that said that they had one of those automobiles, but that it wasn't quite ready to be displayed on the lot yet. And so I sat down, filled out a lead, and in this I said, I'm interested in this particular car. I even gave them the stock number. I said, I want to know when it is going to be available to be viewed on the lot because I'm a cash buyer. You would think that is a pretty good lead, wouldn't you?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It doesn't get much better than that.
Well, here's the result. I had 4 calls in the next day and a half, all from different salespeople at that dealership, none of whom knew what car I was interested in. They just said, hey, you're looking for a car, or what kind of car are you looking at?
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, there was just no comprehension that I'd already selected my car, I knew what I wanted, and all I needed to know was information that was going to lead me towards the completion of the deal. And I would tell each one of these salespeople exactly what was going on, and then a few hours later I get called back by a completely different salesperson who has no knowledge of that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just insane. The customer today, if they send in a lead form, they expect a high degree of professionalism. Most of the time, given the tools that are available to them, customers probably aren't sending in a lead that says, hey, I'm looking for a car, I have no idea what I want, can you help me? Mm-hmm. What they're probably doing is saying, hey, I saw on the internet you have this, here's what I'm interested in, and most of the time when they're getting called back, because I had I don't know how many emails and other responses from other people who read that article online and agreed with me, they're getting calls back and the people aren't paying any attention to what's written on that lead form.
Yeah.
And that means, and what happens is not only do you not advance your cause of selling a car, you actually hurt yourself. By the 4th call, I said, I'm not dealing with these yo-yos, period.
Mm-hmm. So let's take a step back and what just on a practical level, what do you recommend that how do they handle these things? Clearly, what their sales funnel, these things are like getting probably the emails coming in and getting dispersed to like 4 different salesmen, probably because they don't want a lead to like slip between the cracks. So they just figure, well, send it to everyone. And then is there some sort of practical solution and maybe even some software or something that you could recommend for dealerships and how to handle these sorts of
You've already identified the first problem. There's no professionalism. Professional sales forces and professional marketing forces don't blast out a lead to everybody on the sales floor. Professional sales forces put out a lead to one person, and they task that one person with following up on the lead in a professional manner. Mm-hmm. That's so the customer doesn't get called multiple times by people and figure out that you're an idiot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, everything I'm about to tell you just falls under the category of be a pro, for God's sake.
Mm-hmm.
When the dealership gets a lead, you send that lead to one person, and you say, hey, I need to know what's going on with this in a couple of hours or whatever, and you want to follow up on these leads quickly. I mean, these leads get stale real fast. You know that.
Sure.
But, and I mean, the sales manager ought to be able to say to that salesperson within a couple hours, okay, what's happening here? When are they coming in? The salesperson should read the entire lead, get whatever information is requested, then call the customer in a professional manner. I'm following up on this inquiry you had about such and such an automobile. It's ready to go. It's ready to show. And when would you like to come in? And set a professional appointment to have them come in and view the automobile. Mm-hmm. And I can already hear dealers right now as I'm saying this saying, well, I don't know if I can trust everybody to follow up on a lead. Guess what? If you got a salesperson you can't trust to follow up on a lead, get rid of them. Get a good salesperson.
Yeah, sure.
The overall, and God, I hate to harp on this, but the overall level of professionalism in car sales, especially considering the price points that you're selling them at, the high value of the goods that you're selling, are just atrocious. There's typically more professionalism at a furniture store where somebody's buying a $1,000 bedroom set.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's go down the sales funnel a little bit and talk about phone leads. As I mentioned to you at the top of the call, I have some call tracking software, so I'm oftentimes working with dealers with answering phones and kind of that doing metrics on phone calls. And I notice a lot of dealerships have, really atrocious salespeople picking up the phones. And I wonder if you have some tips for them on that. Just some basic tips on how to properly answer a phone call lead. Because I consider these leads much more warm than your average, email type of a lead.
You mean when someone is calling in?
Correct. From the website, from Craigslist, from
Sure.
Auto Trader, they pick up the phone. They've actually taken, and maybe they're even calling after an email interaction. But the bottom line is they've picked up the phone and dialed the dealership, and now the salesperson has them on the phone.
Let me give you the number one tip that I can give you to maximize the effect of a salesperson picking up the phone and answering. Smile. Mm-hmm. Smile before you answer that phone. When you smile, you sound helpful, you sound enthusiastic, you sound positive. When you don't smile, you sound like you're just waiting for the bell to ring to get off work. Mm-hmm. So start by smiling. And then when you pick up the phone, greet people in a professional manner. And I always love the dealerships to say, well, it's a great day at Roberts Chevrolet or whatever. But again, I think it comes back to having your act together. When customers ask questions, they expect answers. And this is a big transition. When I started out selling cars, one of the things that they trained us on was when the customer calls asking for information, we used to be trained not to give them information. We used to be trained just to try to do whatever we could to get them to walk in the door. And again, with the accessibility of the information that there is nowadays, customers aren't going to go for that. When people call in asking for information, give them the information that they want. Mm-hmm. I'm calling in about the red 2005 Mustang. Is it still in stock? Well, the old school salesperson is going to say, well, I think it might be. Why don't you come on in and let's set up a time for you to come in and we'll see if we can check that out, whether it's in stock or not.
Yeah.
Today's salesperson has to be able to check and say, well, I'm sorry, we don't have that one in stock, but we do have a blue one, we do have a silver one. Because if the customer comes in on a false premise, then that customer's never going to buy from you.
Yeah, sure.
The focus needs to be less on generating an immediate transaction, no matter what the cost, no matter what it takes, and transitioning that to forming relationships with your customers. And the biggest component that a car salesperson can do to build a relationship is just be straight with the customer.
Yeah.
Be straight, be informed, be professional, because a lot of times the customer will have the information at their hands.
Mm-hmm. So now let's go one step further. When the customer shows up on the lot, do you have some tips there for the salesmen that are greeting the customers coming in?
Okay. First of all, do not attack. Now, I know this is tough, We've all probably worked for the dealership where it was, first person to reach the customer is the person who gets them. Mm-hmm. And then you had to stay with that customer hanging off their shoulder the entire time they were on, otherwise you didn't get the deal. Again, today's environment requires more professionalism and, quite frankly, more courtesy to the customer. One thing that I learned years ago, and it was actually one of my customers who more or less taught me this, I used to greet customers when they came onto the lot, introduce myself, give them a business card, and then I would ask them this question. Tell me how you would like to shop for a car. What I mean by that is, do you want me to stick with you and assist you as you walk around the lot, or would you like me to just hang back and check in with you every now and then? Mm-hmm. And it always worked out about 50-50. Half the customers wanted me to stay there, half of the customers wanted me to hang back. The customers who wanted me to hang back, I would say, okay, do me a favor. Here's my business card. I'll hang back, but in hanging back, I don't want another salesperson to attack you and get you. So if another salesperson approaches you, just show them this card. Mm-hmm. I'll be here if you need me. Customers really appreciated that because I was treating them like human beings instead of treating them like a walking wallet. And I realized that that is backwards of what a lot of car salespeople are taught to do. But, here's the thing, that if you look at any survey of car buyers, the vast majority of them are going to say that they love the car and they hate the buying experience, which is stupid. Cars are fun. Mm-hmm. Buying cars ought to be a lot of fun. And the car dealers have made it so that that is the part that people look forward to the least. Yeah. Most dealerships could increase their revenues quite a bit just by creating an enjoyable buying experience, because that would mean customers would come back and buy and trade more often. Mm-hmm. That's what's so funny. It just really surprises me that most car dealers haven't gotten to this yet. But again, you've got to be, I think today's car salesperson has to be much more professional and much more respectful of not only getting the customer to buy, but understanding the way that the customer wants to buy and working within that.
Mm-hmm. So let's go one step further and talk about the post-sale process. Obviously, kind of keeping in line with your being respectful. Let's speak to that. What is respectful as far as someone who's bought a car from you? How often should you follow up? What's the next move to maybe just see how their experience is going with this car and then potentially bring them in for another car sale down the road?
Yeah, a great question. I would recommend follow-ups at, typically follow up a couple of days after purchase just to make sure that everything works the way it's supposed to. Follow up again in a couple of weeks, and then on that follow-up, you can get a little bit more detailed. And if you're in doubt about how often the customer wants to hear from you, ask them. On a new sale, I would follow up probably at 2 days, 2 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, and a year. Mm-hmm. And again, those are primarily checking satisfaction, but at 3 months, 6 months, and a year, now you've earned the right to start talking about the other cars that they may own, or start understanding their families, asking for referrals, that kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. So let's take one step back, because I know and talk about sort of hiring salesmen and training salesmen. I know that a lot of my dealerships really struggle with this. A lot of them, especially a small dealership, there may be 5 or 6 employees. So we're not talking about a big staff. Many of these salesmen are fairly low paid. At best, you get someone who's smart but inexperienced. Maybe you can give us some tips for how to hire salesmen, especially when these dealerships are really on a tight budget.
Okay. Well, I think this business needs to take a different look at how it hires salespeople. What I mean by that is this. The turnover of car salespeople is insane. Mm-hmm. You'll have dealerships that will experience 200% turnover in a year. I know some of those dealerships. And the problem is that you can't form any meaningful relationships with customers when you're turning people that quickly. I would recommend, particularly if you are in a market where it is a little bit tougher to hire salespeople, I think dealerships really need to start looking at getting away from the ancient straight commission model of payment and look at a salary plus commission, because quite frankly, that's what the rest of the sales world has moved to. Mm-hmm. Straight commission is so rare nowadays in B2B selling, and it's getting rarer and rarer in B2C selling. And what happens is that salary plus commission gets perceived as a move up or a step up in someone's career. So you have a lot of car salespeople starting out selling cars, and within a year or two, they're looking at getting out of the business and stepping up. Mm-hmm. And if dealers are really serious about salespeople building a career in this business, and they should be, car sales can be a wonderful, wonderful, fun career. They need to look at pay plans that look more long term. Mm-hmm. When you advertise for a straight commission position nowadays, you lose half your applicant pool, and in all honesty, it's usually the half that you'd like to have.
Exactly.
Because they have options. You don't want to be perceived as the employer of last resort for somebody who doesn't have anything else that they can do. Mm-hmm. So I think that's number one. Number two, no cattle call hiring. Cattle call hiring is, well, I need one salesperson, so I'm going to hire three, and the strongest one will survive. Mm-hmm. Usually and by the way, straight commission leads to this. Usually what ends up happening is that the strongest one bails out first because he figures out that you haven't created an opportunity where everybody can make a living. Mm-hmm. And then you're left with the weaker players that don't have options. If you need one, hire one. And then put them through a good hiring process. At least 2 interviews, one of which should be a behavioral interview. Use a third-party assessment tool like a profile sales assessment on them. Mm-hmm. Do reference checks. Do the due diligence. Yeah, it extends the hiring process longer than the 1 to 2 days that most dealerships do. But that's okay. If you're building a more professional sales force, that's time and money that will return itself to you again and again and again. And then after you get them hired, really train them. Don't sit them down and listen to tapes. Don't just have them shadow a salesperson for a day. Really train them with a training program that makes sense, that helps them relate well to customers, that is customer friendly, and that is going to leave everybody walking away from the sales transaction thinking, that was a great experience. Mm-hmm. I could literally do a week-long program on building a more professional sales force in the car business. Mm-hmm. I'm only hitting the very, very high points here.
Sure. Are there some specific materials? You talk about, training materials and doing more than just having them shadow a salesman. Are there some specific training materials that you would recommend, or some tips for actually setting up a more professional, training program?
Well, for training, I would not use any of the car sales specific training that's out there. I'll be very blunt about that. Mm-hmm. I've watched a number of them on YouTube. I've experienced a number of them, and they're all using the same 1955 method. And I'll even make this a little bit of a commercial for myself. If you want to learn how to train people in a customer-friendly manner, get a hold of me, TroyHarrison.com. Mm-hmm. I'm actually looking at developing a program for car sales trainers. And for car sales training, I haven't done it yet. But I'm actually looking at creating some sort of a multimedia course for car salespeople, simply because there isn't anything out there that I've found that is really customer friendly.
Mm-hmm. And that's a good segue. Let's talk a minute about Troy Harrison and Associates. Maybe you can just give us sort of the 2-minute elevator pitch for what you offer there.
Absolutely. The big thing that I do is I help companies grow their profits through the better use and development of their sales force. Now, subsets of that means that I train salespeople to have quality conversations with customers that not only lead to more deals up front, but they also lead to longer relationships with customers, the kind of relationships that you can bank on, where people are coming back to you and using you as their default source for their next purchase, and they're referring you around because they enjoyed the buying experience so much. Mm-hmm. I train sales managers to manage and develop their sales forces to that higher level. Sales managers, the core skill of sales management is not used very much, and that is their ability to coach, develop, and troubleshoot their salespeople. I teach sales managers how to do that. I consult with business owners, whether it's a car dealer or whether it's the president of a $2 billion manufacturing company, on how to build and structure a highly professional sales force that's going to grow their revenues predictably, consistently, and strongly year over year over year. Mm-hmm. And I work with them on all these issues: hiring, compensation, management, any issue centered around the sales force. Basically, Ashley, anything a client needs to build a stronger, more powerful, more productive, and more profitable sales force, I can help them with.
Mm-hmm. Great. Now, I noticed people call you the Sales Navigator. Can you tell us why?
Sure. I actually started adopting that title about a year ago because somebody said to me, you're really great at helping salespeople navigate this new world of selling. Mm-hmm. And I thought that's a great title because that's really what I do. It's like I said, sales has changed so much in the last 10 years because of information and because of the Internet. And so I look at it that my job is to be their navigator, to be their guide, to be their GPS, to help them move through the pitfalls, the changes, and quite frankly, the turbulent waters of today's sales environment. So that's why they call me the Sales Navigator.
Yeah. It's funny, your whole angle on being respectful to the customer. I come from sort of the online marketing world, and there's kind of a big movement in that world as well, that customers are just way too sophisticated in this day and age to fall for all these sort of, short-term tricks that, used to work back in the old days. So it's just interesting. It sounds like in the sales world, that's the same sort of direction we're going.
Well, it is true. Customers are being bombarded by information. Look at, can you imagine 20 years ago something like Cars.com being at people's fingertips for figuring out what is where and all the different cars that they could buy? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's insane. And it's potentially a great opportunity for dealerships. And, here's the thing. Just because somebody comes in on one type of car doesn't mean they have to leave in that type of car. Mm-hmm. We've all seen that. I can certainly remember the customers who came in looking for a new Ford Escort four-door sedan that drove away in a new Mustang GT because that's what really turned their crank.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. These have got to be used properly, respectfully, and professionally to be able to get that customer in and give them the opportunity to convert one way or the other.
Mm-hmm. So what's the best way for people to get in contact with you if they want to follow up with you?
Pretty easy. They can look me up at TroyHarrison.com. That's TroyHarrison.com. Okay. They can call me at 913-645-3603, or they can email me at Troy@TroyHarrison.com.
Perfect. And I will list all that stuff in the show notes so that people can easily get to that. You've been very generous with your time. It's some great nuggets of wisdom, so I really do appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the call.
If you're currently looking for a high-quality auto dealer website, check out our sister site, motorcarsites.com. We offer high-quality auto dealer websites at a very affordable price. Dealers can typically save between $50 and $150 per month by using our service. You can upload as many cars as you'd like at no additional cost. We automatically export your cars to all the major platforms like Cars.com and AutoTrader, so you don't have to manage your inventory in multiple locations. We can have your new website up and running usually in less than 24 hours. Setup is free and easy, and there are no long-term contracts, so you can cancel at any time. Check out motorcarsites.com to learn more. So that's our show. I hope you got some value out of it, and it can help you grow your business. Thanks for listening.